Hello, welcome. Can everyone hear me?
Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an organizer and may now speak to any other organizers or panelists on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast.
Hello, can everyone hear me? I want to welcome you to HR Profile Employment Screenings bi-monthly webinar. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here. One moment, quickly, while we get this. Okay, all right. So I am Jane McFadden, and I am your client advocate here at HR Profile. You are tuned into our bi-monthly webinars, a Webby, if you will. That's the new term used to describe these meetings. It's kind of cute, but it reminds me of frogs' webbed feet, a Webby. All right, well, we'll go with it for now. This month, our focus has been on talent management and what you, as a human resource professional, can do to make the biggest impact within your organization. Can pre-employment screening and background checks create a solid talent management foundation? We've got Julie Johnson here with us today to discuss this topic in full, because the answer is yes, and Julie will be able to explain how. Hiring is expensive. What the industry is beginning to discover is that the more you do on the front end with an applicant to discover who they are, the better luck you will have with that person as an employee. The Devine Group works with HR departments and companies to help throughout the whole employee life cycle. But Julie feels that the biggest impact that she can make is working with clients on who they are bringing on board in the first place. Bringing in a valuable employee can lead to decreased turnover, increased engagement and productivity, and less absenteeism. Here at HR Profile, our tagline is "Insight is better than hindsight," and I think with what you'll see today, you will agree that that couldn't be more true. Julie Johnson is an expert in the HR, human resource, and talent management arena. She is constantly developing and learning and evolving her craft. She is a trusted resource helping companies improve their HR metrics by decreasing turnover and improving productivity and revenue. She's also the past president of Cincinnati's SHRM organization, GECRA. Today, Julie will be talking about something that she is passionate about, pre-screening competency models, how to build them, understanding the benefits and business impact in the selection process, and then, most importantly, how to implement this into your organization. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer session so that any questions that you have, or if something is said that you'd like to expand further upon during the presentation, be sure to ask when you think of it. You can put it in the question box or in the chat box. We've got two options available with these webinars. So type it into the comment box anytime during the presentation, and then it will be discussed after. The questions that are in the box are going to be discussed first, and then we'll open the floor for any additional comments or questions. So, without further ado, here is Julie Johnson. Welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And as you shared your tagline, I thought about ours, which is the precision to predict success. So both of us are tuned into how to avoid hiring mistakes before you make them. Because we have tools that can help then predict, what type of employee you're going to get, and you can make those decisions before you jump in with both feet on that next hire. So I am really happy to be here and happy to kick off the year with you. I'm not sure about that Webby name, but I'm sure it'll take off as you move through the year and into these webinars. So I'm really happy to be here for the first one. And as Jane mentioned, the answer to this question is really yes. Can pre-employment screening and background checks create a solid talent management foundation? Absolutely. At the Devine Group, we truly believe that these are tools to have higher potential talent higher performing teams, and ultimately, for you, higher profitable organizations. So I do have a few polls that we'll be doing today, and Jane, if you wouldn't mind launching those for me when I ask, that would be great. So we'll just go ahead and kick it off, not to a poll yet, but just moving to our next slide. So here's a little bit about what we're going to do over the next 50 minutes, of course, giving you time for some questions and answers at the end. Would love to respond to those in through the chat box. So as Jane said, I am Julie Johnson, and I work for the Devine Group. Now, you've all seen my picture, so when I actually do presentations, I throw up a picture of my two kids, my two boys, and those are accurate ages, so 5 and 2, of course, the light of my life, and really enjoy having them. On the business side, I've spent 11 years in human resources, so prior to working for a business partner out with different businesses, I spent about 9 years in a traditional corporate human resources role. I spent a lot of time in recruiting. I did the talent management activities. I worked with succession planning. I actually used behavioral assessment tools as part of my talent management practices as an HR professional. So having experience in that niche part of human resources, I really fell in love with that area. And that's why I was interested in joining the Devine Group, because I really think that having tools to help an individual with their own self-awareness on the development side is really just a wow that you can provide to them. So whenever I have conversations with my clients' employees, you know, I'm always kind of bringing that wow factor to folks and either confirming something they knew about themselves or helping them discover something. And that's just really rewarding. And then, of course, as Jane mentioned in the introduction, where I find the tools, you know, extremely valuable to organizations is in the selection process. So I think that before you hire someone, having a specific competency model set up that you can measure a candidate's behavioral makeup to, or sort of a blueprint, lets you make smarter hiring decisions. And you know that just ripples through the business. So I think that's really important. My contact information is on here. You're welcome to get in touch. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn too, and then I'm also on Twitter. So if anybody wants to tweet about this as we're going through, my name is at Julie _ AKA JJ. So you can find me that way. The other piece that Jane mentioned is that I am a past president of our local SHRM chapter, and I think that that is a really important part for me with my networking and my overall success being an HR professional. I can't say enough good things about it. And so I would encourage you, wherever you are based out of, that you find ways to get involved in your local HR community, because I think that it is just a tremendous opportunity for all of us to be able to connect with one another and share. In fact, it would be great right now if in the comments box, if you could just type where you're from and let everybody know, then we can get an idea of how far our reach is, what our geographic footprint looks like today. I think that would be great. So take a moment and just share where you're from in the comments box. So if you hadn't seen the agenda, that's where we're going today. So we've done the About Julie part. I'm going to share a little bit about the Devine Group, and then we're going to jump into competency models and why we have them and how we can build them, and a couple of samples. So just a minute about the company that I work for. We are a talent management solutions firm. We've been around since 1970, and we have a staff of industrial organizational psychologists. We've got folks like myself who've have spent time in human resources, kind of in the trenches of what you do every day. We have a labor economist. We have psychometricians that do a lot of the analysis on the data so we can build really great benchmarks for our clients. And what we do as a basis is we offer behavioral assessments that organizations use across the entire employee life cycle. So when you're thinking about who to bring on board to your organization, we will create a custom assessment for you. We will cater it to perhaps a competency model that you have already created. We also help along the development side, so building assessments for development, coaching. If succession planning is big for you, I know that that's really important these days, as well as doing organization and team solutions. We work with more than 5,000 firms across the globe, and that includes organizations of all sizes. And we have experience working with clients that have positions anywhere from hourly positions up to the C-level. So we threw a couple of our logos up there. You know, obviously with 5,000 firms across the globe, we have many more than that, but we're, you know, proud to work with such a great array of clients, as I'm sure all of you are, and what you've experienced working with HR profiles as well. Now, I would like to throw up the first poll, if we could. And this is asking you how many people, or how many of you have competency models currently in place at your organization? All right, so it says that the poll is open. Organizer must close poll to enable screen sharing. So I hope everyone can see it. Jane, you can let me know if I need to do something. I can actually not see it. So we'll give folks a moment to respond.
All right, so everyone has
Jane, how are we
been
coming on that poll?
voting in the poll. We have 57% yes and 43% no. 88% of the people have voted, and it's been up for about a minute.
Okay.
So if
All right,
anyone else
wonderful,
wants to get their last minute in. And
great.
ready to close it?
And yeah, that sounds good. We may as well give that a close. And I'm actually not able to see the poll, so it's good that you shared the viewpoints with me.
92% ended up voting on that one. So, and 58% is yes, they do have one.
Okay, good, good. It sounds like, you know, so that's the majority. So that's good news, definitely. And here's the reason why this is so important, getting into the global challenges. I show a picture here of kind of the CEO on one side and employees on the other, and there's a big gap in the middle, you know, a cliff or what have you. And what business leaders are realizing is that there is a gap in required competencies of employees in order to achieve that business success. And that's a serious issue for leadership. So there's still that skills gap, and it's getting wider and wider. And so it's important that we are measuring the competencies that are critical to our business success and that map to our business strategy, because that is what will create a better bottom line. So I actually have a second poll here that we can put up that shows you, you know, some of the examples of what falls into this gap and what is impacting your business. You know, is it the turnover? Is it decreased productivity or innovation? So just take a second to vote on that.
By a landslide so far, reduced ability to serve customers or clients is, well, it's at 38% right now. 43, 47.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't have the right skill set, then you're not going to.
Yes, but
you're not going to be able to meet the demands of your clients and customers.
this most accurate answer would be D for me, all the above. That's fine.
So what's our final say there on that poll?
All right, we are at 48% reduced the ability, 14% reduced productivity, 24% increased turnover, and 14% was all of the above.
Okay, yes, I thought that all of the above. And of course, there's more to it as well. I mean, there are other things that could be slipping into that chasm, so to speak, when you don't have the proper competencies within your employees. And the question here is, what is your competitive advantage? And I'm sure everybody on the phone, you know this. You know what it is. It's your people. And that's the bottom line. And what we've seen is that regardless of the economic conditions that we've been through, the recession, the coming out of the recession, the truth is that the competition for top talent has remained high. And it's seen as the key differentiator among organizations. So this is why paying attention to who you bring into your organizations is so important, and how competencies can really impact how you make those decisions of who to hire. You're probably familiar with the phrase, what gets measured gets done. And defining and measuring effectiveness, especially the performance of employees, is a critical part of your job as either that HR leader or the business leader. So you can measure that through competencies. Because when you think about those metrics, how do you define the skills, behaviors, and attitudes that employees need to perform their roles effectively? How do you know they're qualified for the job? In other words, how do you know what to measure? And a lot of people debate this on what to measure. Some people think formal education is a reliable measure. I need someone with that degree or that advanced degree. Others believe more in on-the-job training. I'll bring them in and get them up to speed on the actual job. Or it could be years of experience. I need 10-plus years of experience. And then other people argue that personal characteristics hold the key to effective work behavior. And while all these are important, I think that it creates part of the puzzle. None seem sufficient to describe what the ideal set of behaviors and traits needed for a particular role, or maybe across your organization at a certain level, maybe at the leadership level. And the other thing that these pieces don't guarantee is that individuals will perform to the standards and levels required by the organization. So a more complete way of approaching this is to link individual performance to the goals of the business. And again, many companies are using competencies to do that. And when you place data at the core of your talent management processes, it allows you to manage your talent with the same rigor as you would other assets. And of course, since people are your most important asset, you want to treat them with that level of importance and ultimately respect. Now, this is why these statistics, again, addressing the global challenges, this is why competency-based hiring is needed and growing in popularity. Just take a moment to look at these and determine which one stands out to you the most. I mean, these are truly, to me, startling statistics. And you can even, go ahead and put in the chat box which one stands out to you and might be most relevant to your organization. The one that I like the most is the bottom one. That 40, and when I say like, I mean, I don't really like it, but it stands out to me, that 46% of new hires fail within the first 18 months. That's a huge number. And to carry on to that, 89% of that turnover is due to a lack of soft skills, and only 11% hard skills. So technically, you could hire them and they have the background to do the job, but maybe they don't match the culture, or they don't fit into the team, or they don't have the right competencies to do the work. So it's important to measure these up front with that predetermined competency model or competency framework that you've implemented throughout the talent management cycle. All right. Next, I've got another piece of information here about how important competency modeling has been to businesses over the years. And this comes from a survey from the Corporate Executive Board, and it was measuring different pieces of importance to businesses, and I circled the one that relates to competency models. So you see what percentage businesses are endorsing competency models, and in 2012 it wasn't even measured in this survey. Now in 2013 it increased, or was finally being measured, at 34%, and in 2014 we had an increase to 42%, which is good. However, still not strong enough. And the relative lack of assessment use in these post-hire decisions suggests that organizations are basing promotion and development decisions on really subjective criteria, or just on performance data that may not be relevant to a more senior position. I'm sure you have all lived through the terrible, situation that occurs when someone makes a great employee but not a great manager. So if you had a competency model in place to measure the skill set required for the manager position, you would be able to clearly see that individual contributor is a great individual contributor, but is not ready or doesn't have the competencies currently to be a manager. Talking about what competencies look like, and knowing that almost 60% of you use competencies, I'll go over this quickly. Competency modeling is very different from a traditional job analysis. The aim is not to encapsulate how a role has been performed to date, but rather to identify the behaviors that will be needed to achieve long-term strategic goals. So competency modeling is forward-looking and not rooted in the past. So competencies, I'm sure you all had similar definitions. They're measurable skills, attitude, or attributes that can be closely aligned to organizational strategy. And therefore, a competency model is a collection of those that together define successful performance in your work setting. So through competency modeling, we enable organizations, and these are large global organizations around the world, to successfully match specific people to specific roles, even as the requirements of those roles continuously change and evolve. Because remember, we are forward-looking in terms of what competencies are required for success in the role ongoing, not just what might be required today. So this not only secures closer alignment between talent strategy and business strategy, but also helps minimize risk of investment when recruiting or developing employees. And competency models, and perhaps you use them this way, also help to align individual capabilities with the needs of the organization. It leads to improved individual and organizational performance because I'm in the right role because I measured to the competencies before I moved into that position or was hired for that position. It helps you manage strategic workforce planning. So what's the talent we have and what's the talent that we need because of those competency or skill gaps that are occurring. And then it also helps to facilitate career planning conversations and actions. One of the competencies that we use within our standard leadership model is called simply leadership effectiveness. And you probably have an equivalent competency within your model. Our definition of leadership effectiveness is achieved with distinction, persevering despite resistance and influencing others. And the way that our tool works is it measures at the behavioral level, and then we group those behaviors to form competencies. So what you see below that definition are the 8 behaviors that make up leadership effectiveness, like influence, decisiveness, and all those that you see listed there. So this is an important one in our leadership model. Again, describing competencies. These, in my research, are what I see as important competencies today. And I'm curious if you agree with these and what perhaps leadership competencies are important in your organization. So I do have a third poll to put up, and it is asking which of these 3 is most important in your organization today: the learning agility, critical thinking, or business acumen. And I hope you appreciate the cartoon that I put up. I always like to put a little fun into these. So we'll give everyone a moment to respond.
How come you can't see the cartoon?
Now we're going to get the information.
All right, so far it's about 45% for learning agility and 41% for critical thinking, and then only 13% for business acumen. So we're almost a dead tie for the agility and critical thinking.
Great. Yeah, you know, I should have put in all of the above, too. May have selected that one. But yeah, definitely. And critical thinking is not something that you can easily develop, really. You know, getting after that problem-solving ability to look at some data and make a decision from it. I mean, that is really, it's hard to do, and it's not easy to develop. So you really want to hire folks that have that before they join your organization. And what also I've read about in terms of critical traits for an employee's future success within your organization are folks that are collaborative, that have great communication skills, are creative, as well as flexible and adaptable. So I think some of that can fit into those competencies that you see listed there. So thanks for participating in the poll. Moving forward to building competency models, what you need to do is start with the end in mind, which is why I have that in bold, so to speak. And when you think about it, what would be really important to know before starting? And that is your business strategy. You know, that's the end in mind. That's the 1-year, 2-year, 5-year plan that your organization has in place. And if you're not sure what that is, you know, you need to ask. And if you don't have that developed, or the business leaders, you're in an organization where the business leaders don't have a strategy dictated or developed or communicated, then it's definitely time to start that process. Now, developing a competency framework can take considerable effort. To make sure the framework is actually used as needed, it's important to make it relevant to the people who will be using it. And you do that so they can take ownership of it. And the first trick is to involve the people that are actually doing the work. So these frameworks should not be developed solely by folks in HR. We don't always know what each job actually involves, nor should it just be left to the managers who don't always understand exactly what each member of their staff does. To understand a role fully, you really have to go to the source, the person doing the job. And then you should also get a variety of inputs into what makes someone successful in that job. The second piece to successfully build a framework is to communicate. People tend to get nervous about performance issues. So if your competency model is being used around performance management, you want to let them know why you're developing the framework, how it will be created, and how you'll use it. The more you communicate in advance, the easier your implementation will be. And then lastly is use relevant competencies. Ensure that the competencies you include apply to all roles covered by the framework, because you know, if you include irrelevant competencies, people will probably have a hard time relating to the framework in general. For example, if you created a framework to cover the whole organization and you put financial management in there, then you want to make sure that all the positions have financial management as a required competency. Now, perhaps it wouldn't apply across your whole organization, but maybe you have a specific management competency set. Then that would certainly involve a competency around financial management. You might be asking yourself, what are ways to get started? If you don't have a framework or a competency model, which about 40% don't on the call today, what you can do is you can use a preset list of common standard competencies and then customize it to the specific needs of your organization. You can use outside partners to help develop the framework for you. Or you can create a general organizational framework and then expand it for other frameworks as needed. So for example, you might start in recruiting and then expand the competency model into the compensation or performance management process at a later time. Now I have a few steps on how to go about building a competency model. So these are the 4 steps in the framework. I keep it that simple for you. Prepare, collect information, build the framework, and implement. Sounds easy, I think. So the first step in preparing, you want to define the purpose. Before you start analyzing jobs and figuring out what each role needs for success, make sure you look at the purpose for creating the framework. How you plan to use it will impact who you involve in preparing it. And remember, you want to err on the side of including more people than less. So that way you can help with the communication and the implementation later on. So when you use a framework for filling a job vacancy, that will be very specific as to who you have involved now and what type of model you build, a very specific model. But a framework for evaluating compensation, that would have to cover a wide range of roles. So you want to make sure you define the purpose. And again, when you're getting started, you might start with a smaller purpose, such as recruiting, and then expand your competency model or framework later. And then the next step in preparing is creating that team. Include people from all areas of your business that will use the framework. Remember, having them involved early on and communicating early on will help with the implementation later. And where possible, aim to present or represent the diversity of your organization. It's important to think about what the long-term needs would be. So you want to include a diverse group to represent your organization. And that way, once you have a comprehensive team, you know that that team can remain involved to keep the framework updated and relevant. Step 2 is to collect information. And this is the main part of the framework. This is when you're doing the heavy lifting. And generally, the better the data you collect, the more accurate your framework will be. So because of this, it's a good reason to consider which techniques you'll use to collect the information about the roles and the work that's involved in each position. So you might want to consider these 4 ways to do that. The first is observation. So this works well for roles that have a hands-on labor component that you can actually observe. So you're literally watching people while they're performing their roles and taking notes on what's most critical to their success within the position. The second way is to interview people. So talk to people individually, choose a sample of people to interview, or you could even conduct a group interview, like a focus group. You may also want to interview the supervisor of the job you're assessing, and this helps you learn what a wide variety of people believe is needed for the role's success. And remember, as I said before, you want this to be forward thinking. So it's not just about what's happening in the position today, what is that person or what is the role today, but what does the role need to be in order to meet the business challenges coming forward and to map to that business strategy. The next way is you can use a questionnaire, And we actually have a questionnaire that we've developed, so a technology that will take into account input from these subject matter experts that you would include in observation or in the interview. And it's really an efficient way to gather data. Spend time, if you do this independently, making sure that you're asking the right questions, and always consider the issues of reliability and validity. And then the last step there, in terms of the information, is to analyze the work. Which behaviors are used to perform the jobs covered by the framework? And you might want to think about incorporating other pieces, like what is the business plan, the strategy and objectives? What are your organizational principles? You might want to include that in the model. Review job descriptions, if they're up to date. I know that those can be kind of a nightmare to keep up to date. If you've got any sort of regulatory or other compliance issues that are impacting your business, you'd want to consider that as you analyze the work. Also, perhaps, what are the predictions for the future of your business, the organization, or even in the industry? So that's step 2, is gathering information. This is just a screenshot of our sample questionnaire. And you can, again, send this out to subject matter experts, and they would rate statements on this scale that's on the bottom, not required all the way up to essential, to determine what's most important for the role. And then the third step is building the framework. So the steps here involve grouping all of the behaviors and skill sets finally into the competencies. So what you need to do first is group the statements and ask the folks that are on the team to help with this. So it's not something, again, that would be in a silo. But you would ask the team members to read through the behavior statements and group them. And the goal is to have 3 or 4 groupings at first. So you might have something called manual skills, decision-making skills, perhaps judgment skills, or that critical thinking piece, or learning agility, and maybe something grouped into interpersonal skills. Then you want to create subgroups. So break down each of the larger groupings into these subcategories of related behaviors. And typically there will be 3 or 4 subgroupings for each larger category. And this provides the basic structure of the competency framework. And then you can even refine those subgroups even more. And you would ask yourself why and how the behaviors relate or don't relate to one another, and then revise your groupings as necessary. And then comes the fun part, at least I think so. You would identify and name the competencies. So ask your team to identify a specific competency to represent each of the smaller subgroups of behaviors. And you can also name the larger category too. For example, interpersonal skills might remain interpersonal skills, or management skills, or leadership skills. And you might want to add levels for each competency. And this is particularly useful when using the framework for compensation or performance reviews. So to do that, you take each competency and divide the related behaviors into measurement scales according to complexity, or responsibility, or scope. And these levels could already exist if you have different job grades in place already. And then the last step there is to validate and revise the competencies as necessary. So for each item, you want to ask yourself, is this behavior demonstrated by people who perform the work most effectively? In other words, are people who don't demonstrate this behavior really ineffective in their role? You also want to ask, is this behavior relevant and necessary for effective work performance? So that's how you continue to validate and refine the competency model. The competency model, it's not static. It can be moving. So if it's been 5 years since you revised your competency model, then you're going to want to take a look and make sure that it's still relevant for your organization and for the future of the business. The next step the last step, is implementation. And as you roll out the finalized competency framework, remember the principle of communication that we mentioned earlier. To help get buy-in from members of staff at all levels of the organization, it's important to explain to them why the framework was developed and how you would like it to be used. You can even discuss how it will be updated and have that continual refinement and validation. And any procedures that you've put in place to accommodate changes, perhaps within the industry or within your business. So here's some tips for implementing the framework. Again, you want to make sure that you link it to business objectives, make connections between individual competencies and organizational goals and values as much as possible. You also want to set proficiency levels, as I mentioned. And a proficiency level is a set of descriptions of behavior indicators. So each level in the scale describes a stage of your development towards competence within that competency. And proficiency levels are useful in two ways. One, it helps people decide what to aim for. And two, it tells them when they've actually achieved their goals. So great to use in succession planning as well as performance management. And then you also want to reward the competencies. So check that your policies and practices support and reward the competencies identified. You want to provide coaching and training. Make sure there's adequate coaching and training available. People need to know that their efforts will be supported. Keep it simple. Make the framework as simple as possible. You want the document to be used, not filed away and forgotten. And lastly, communicate. I obviously want to say this on every slide. Treat the implementation as you would any other change initiative. The more open and honest you are throughout the process, the better the end result, and the better the chances of the competency model or framework achieving your objectives. So when you're building a competency model, there's a few reasons here of why you would. One of the reasons, broadly speaking, is recruiting. You want to get the role specification right and design a recruitment process that attracts the right candidates. To do that, you can build a competency model and put it into your job description. So that would be used to implement competency-based recruiting and hiring. Another area that it's used is performance management. Integrating competencies into existing or new performance management processes. You can also use it within 360s or other multi-rater processes. And those are positive ways to use a competency model or a competency framework. You can use it in employee development situations, so assessing workforce competency gaps or creating competency-based training and development. And then workforce and succession planning. So building a plan and using assessment tools to allow you to integrate competencies into career pathing. And, as I said at the beginning, one of my passions is to help people develop and to create that self-awareness. And when you incorporate it into succession planning, you're working with your high potentials and you are measuring what competencies they have today and also aligning to see what competencies they'll need in the future and where are those gaps. What do they need to develop in order to be successful? So I actually have a final poll here on this one asking you, where you would like to incorporate or where you do incorporate competency frameworks within your organizations today.
Right off the bat, we're getting 83% of all of the above. The other one is recruiting and then workforce and succession planning.
Okay. Fantastic. Yes, definitely. All of the above. That's what I vote for too. So thanks, everybody. And there's a lot of tools that can help you do that. All right. Why don't we go ahead and close the poll. So what types of benefits can you see when you use competency models? And for those that might need to refine the competency model or maybe even just implement the competency model in other areas of the business, these are business reasons of why you should and how you can get that return on investment. So when you look at, I've got the column that says in dollars, so this is where you're impacting your bottom line by reducing staff turnover, reducing recruitment costs. You can reduce training costs because you have hired the right people who have the competencies that you need in order to meet future business success. And then on the right-hand side, I've got the and cents because, this is what makes better business sense. And, they're all very valuable reasons of why competency modeling works and how it will impact your organization. And in fact, perhaps I should have a sub-bullet under the first one, the greater alignment with business objectives. The sub-bullet I would say is better, service to customers or clients, since that was definitely what the group had voted really falls into the gap when you don't have the right competency set in your employee population. So looking at a couple of samples, this is a nurse sample that we use with one of our clients, and that client is using this on the front end for selection, as well as using it for development too, and onboarding, and they are working through over 1,000 candidates per year across 12 different locations. So they went through a process. It was actually a questionnaire to help build this competency model and determine what's most important for their success. And one that we put in there that they thought they were a little nervous about putting it in, and that was leveraging technology. But in nursing today, there's more technology that needs to be required, a lot with the medical records and how they administer medicine. There's a computer in every hospital room. So it's important that a nurse knows how to use technology. So that's one that they were nervous about adding, but definitely want to keep in for the time being. And I think it's honestly there to stay. So so this nurse model has probably about the maximum number of competencies I'd like to see. I think a competency model should have 6 to 10 competencies. You don't want to overwhelm people. And like I said, they use this competency model on the selection side, and then when a person is hired, they actually give a selection report, or I should say a development report, to the individual that was hired, so they know where they map to the required competencies. And then the other example I have here, I really like. This isn't our competency model, but this was a study done in the food industry that examined competencies needed for women to get to the C-suite. And it examined manager to C-level positions. So it had those conversations with a lot of people to determine what makes this person successful. And what I really like about it is how it is broken down into these 3 buckets. What are the competencies important for leading yourself? What's important for leading people? And then what's important for leading a business? And the ones that are highlighted in colors, those turned out to be the most important of the competencies. And as you can see, the ones under leading business are all highlighted. So those are all important. And what was interesting as I read about this model is that strategic thinking, which is under leading the business, was mentioned as important across each of the levels, so from manager to C-level positions. But those that were currently in a C-level position reflected back that they didn't really learn strategic thinking until later in their careers. So that goes back to the different proficiency levels that we have. Strategic thinking might be important in roles across your business, but it looks different in different positions. And then lastly, I show this diagram. This is one that we use in our business. It just reflects that competencies are valuable across the entire employee life cycle. So just as you said in the poll, you want to be able to use it for all phases of the employee life cycle and have a framework that helps your business and helps your employees, be more successful. And that truly impacts your bottom line and the engagement of your employees. And with that, I am done with the prepared piece and would love to open it up for Q&A.
All right, wonderful. Oh my goodness, that was such a wealth of information. Thank you so much, Julie. My big takeaway from that is how people are the competitive advantage of your organization. And so that quest to get top talent, if you're going to hire someone, you want to make sure that you're going to want to work with them in 20 years, let alone 5 years or 2 months from now. So thank you for that. Some of the questions that we've gotten, the first one right off the bat is talking about credit checks. And Brandy asks, what positions do they run the checks on? And then do they check on an ongoing basis? What criteria do they apply to classify results as unacceptable? And then what action do you take when you find an unacceptable one? Julie, I'm not sure of your expertise in the credit check area. Do you have answers to any of these questions?
That sounds like one that's more in your arena.
I just wanted to make sure that you didn't have any input there. And because it is so specific, credit checks are allowed to do by industry. So whatever industry or position that the person that you're hiring is going to be working on, so it's specific to the position. If you're going to be in HR, credit checks are a reasonable expectation for that. If you're going to be a controller of a company, you can do credit checks. If you're going to be working with money, credit checks are something that you can do. So checking on an ongoing basis is also something that's allowed, but it's per company, whether you want to do that or not. And then the third is what criteria do they apply to classify results? Credit checks can be done just as long as it's related to the job. So the criteria to apply results is based on the company's own models. If they have this policy in place that they hire this person with a credit of this or better, that's going to be something that the company decides on. And then what action do they take when they find an unacceptable one? Again, it's the company that deems it unacceptable, not the agency that's running the check. That's where a lot of people get into trouble with FCRA violations, because we don't say yes or no they can come to work for you. We just provide that information. So, action being taken, adverse action, anytime that you're running a background check and it comes up, adverse action needs to be followed. So that was one question that was asked. Another question, Matt said he loves all the information. Will this presentation be available via PDF or PowerPoint? So Julie, if you would like to make it available via PowerPoint, you can easily send that to me. We have been recording this session, so that will be available online on our YouTube channel, HR Profile Inc. So look for us on YouTube there, and you can watch and review all of this information as much as possible. Another question, we're a smaller company. Is there one thing that we can start doing right away that will impact us immediately? Julie, do you have the answer to that one?
Yes, I do, Jane. Yes, I do. I think, as Jane said in my intro, where the biggest value that you can have with the competency models, I believe it to be in the selection process. And even if you are smaller, that makes your hiring decisions even more important, because that person makes a bigger splash within your organization. So bringing in the right person is even more important. And I recommend developing a competency model for the position and putting that into the job description so people know what's important before they even apply, and then conducting an interview based on those competencies as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you're bringing them in with that competency model, you're interviewing them to the competency model, and then you can, start off onboarding them correctly with that competency model and get their manager involved in coaching that person according to what's required for the role.
Okay, yeah. So competency modeling, if we use it for management positions, how important is it to use it on entry-level, production worker bee? Is it just as important, or maybe more or less?
Yeah, I would say it's just as important. The hourly positions or the worker bees tend to have more turnover, and that adds up. The turnover costs are so high, so you really want to use it in those positions as well as leadership positions.
Okay. Can you work with an organization who already has a competency model in place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The competency models, we have the ability to use our library, our competency library, and map to an organization's already existing model. And if your model has been in place for a while, it might be a good time to revalidate that model and refine it. So yes, we definitely have the ability to work with organizations that are already working within a competency framework, like 60% of the organizations are.
Right. All right. And then is there one that you recommend, a competency model across the entire organization, like just having one that we base everything on, or should each position have its own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I work with organizations that do both. So some organizations have a competency model that they use on the selection side for each position, and they really categorize that. So if you have 300 positions, you don't need 300 competency models. You can group those positions together. And then I also have clients and work with organizations that have one competency model for leadership. So anything that's director level through to the C-suite has a specific competency model set up. And actually that's a lot of fun too, is creating that competency model and talking to the current employees in a development situation according to that competency model and mapping their behavioral blueprint to that competency model and talking to them about, how they can get the most return on their development investment, of time and resources and energy. So I have organizations do both.
Wonderful. Okay, so the last question, Janice asks, how often should we be reviewing our competency models? I think during the presentation you mentioned, if it's been 5 years, you might want to look it over again. Is there a certain amount of time that you would recommend?
It's really the pace that your business changes. So if you are in the financial industry, there's a lot of compliance requirements, there's a lot of regulation. They don't change at the speed a technology company changes. Mm-hmm. So you have to pay attention to what industry you're in. I would say, as a standard rule of thumb, I would go to every 2 years, I would take a look at it. And it doesn't mean that it has to change. It's mm-hmm. just that it can change.
Right. Okay, perfect. Well, that looks like everyone has been taken care of. Again, this webinar has been approved for credit. So your certificate will be coming emailed to you right after this presentation. A big hand goes out to the Devine Group and Julie Johnson. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us. I know that we're all going to go back and take a closer look at our onboarding process and implement what we've learned today. So it's just great, valuable information. I want to make sure that you join us for our next Webby Wednesday. It's going to be March 18th at 2 p.m. We're going to have Sarah Leashock with the Taft Law Firm, and she'll be discussing criminal and other background checks in candidate screening. You can also catch a sneak peek of this presentation on January 28th in Westchester at the ASIS Security Conference. So if you'd like more information on that, you can email me and I'll be glad to send you all the details, or you can go to our website and click on HRP in the News. You'll also be receiving an invitation to that Webby next week, so we look forward to seeing you then. If there are no other questions, then we're going to go ahead and end this webinar. Thank you all so much for being a part of it, and we look forward to